December 20th, 1943. High over northern Germany. The air is thin and sharp, the kind that burns lungs through an oxygen mask. A B-17 bomber drifts out of formation, no longer part of the protected box, just one aircraft alone against a sky that belongs to guns. Flak smoke hangs in black bursts, still expanding, still searching. The fuselage is torn, the tail has been hit, a window is missing, and the cold pours in like water. Inside, men move with the careful urgency of the wounded, checking instruments, checking each other, counting what still answers when called. Far behind them, a single-engine note rises, not friendly, closing fast. The day's rules are about to tighten around one crippled plane. Late 1943. The daylight air war over Europe has become a grinding equation. Altitude, formation discipline, and the distance a fighter can stay with you before fuel turns it back. The U.S. 8th Air Force is pushing deeper into Germany, trying to break the industrial heart of the Reich with massed heavy bombers. But every mile inland sharpens the problem. Bombers are large, steady targets, and the escorts of 1943 cannot always remain overhead for the full route. On 27 December 1943, AE Bomber Command launches Mission 159, sending hundreds of heavy bombers toward targets including Bremen, a city tied tightly to Germany's war production, including major aircraft works. Among those bombers is a B-17F Flying Fortress, serial 423167, the aircraft the crew calls Ye Old Pub. It takes off from RF Kimballton with the 379th Bomb Group on what sources describe as the crew's first combat mission. Bremen matters because it is not symbolic, it is practical. The mission briefing frames it that way. An attack aimed at aircraft production, an attempt to cut into the machinery that keeps German fighters rising into the same winter sky. The bomber stream will have to cross defended airspace, where flak is layered and fighters are waiting, and the crews are told to expect heavy opposition. Inside the American formations, position is survival. Bombers in the center live behind overlapping guns. Bombers on the edges absorb the first attention. Ye Olde Pub is assigned a vulnerable place on the outer boundary of the combat box, a spot described as especially dangerous because attackers often peel the edges first. Then, mechanical failures elsewhere reshuffle the geometry, and the young crew finds itself moved, still exposed, still committed. Ahead is Bremen. Behind is the long path home. Between them is the moment when a single aircraft, damaged, lagging, and alone, becomes the kind of target this war was built to erase. Late 1943, the daylight war over Europe has hardened into routine, but not safety. American heavy bombers fly in tight, stacked formations because the geometry itself is armor. Overlapping fields of fire, mutual visibility, shared timing. When that geometry breaks, the sky becomes personal. A single aircraft, isolated, is no longer part of a system. It is simply a target. On 20 December 1943, the 8th Air Force sends a large force toward Bremen under ETA Bomber Command Mission 159. Contemporary mission records describe 546 heavy bombers dispatched to strike the port area of Bremen, attacked in multiple elements around late morning. Other accounts of this same day's Bremen effort emphasize the broader purpose: hitting war industry tied to fighter production in and around the city, work that keeps German interceptors climbing to meet the bomber stream. From RAF Kimballton, one of the aircraft in the stream is a B-17F Flying Fortress, tail number 423167, known to its crew as Ye Old Pub. The incident that will make this bomber remembered begins with plain facts. The Bremen run is the crew's first mission, and it turns violent before the bombers can even think about home. Bremen is defended by flak and fighters, and the threat is not abstract. The bomber box is designed to keep attackers at a distance, to force head-on approaches into converging guns. But damage changes everything. When a fortress is hit badly enough to lose position, it falls behind the protective wall. Its gunners cannot rely on neighboring ships to cover blind angles. Its pilot cannot match formation speed or altitude. The bomber's survival, normally distributed across dozens of aircraft, collapses into the hands of one crew and whatever the airframe can still bear. And that is how the sound rising behind the bomber in the winter sky becomes more than a threat. It becomes the next phase of the story. Because now the war's mechanics bring an enemy fighter close enough to see the faces. Human angle, tactical angle. Inside the bomber, the war narrows to minutes and meters. The crew of Ye Olde pub is no longer thinking about Germany or strategy. They are counting injuries. One man is dead. Others are wounded. Oxygen lines are damaged. The temperature inside the aircraft drops well below, freezing, and the thin air at altitude makes every movement slow, deliberate, expensive. Frost forms where breath escapes a mask. Blood darkens flight suits and stiffens as it cools. This is the human cost of falling behind. The gunners know what it means. A straggler rarely comes home. Training films say it without emotion. Lone bombers attract repeated attacks until nothing flies anymore. The men stay at their positions anyway, even when guns are jammed or power is gone. They watch the sky because there is nothing else to do. Fear has already spent itself. What remains is routine. Tactically, the situation is simple and brutal. The bomber has lost formation speed. 2 engines are damaged. The tail section is shredded, reducing defensive fire where it matters most. German fighters are trained to exploit exactly this condition, approaching from the rear quarter, staying outside effective arcs, firing short, precise bursts. It is efficient. It is expected. From the Luftwaffe side, doctrine is clear. Interceptors are scrambled to break up the bomber stream, then finish off the damaged aircraft. Each kill reduces bombing accuracy and morale. A crippled B-17 is not a dilemma. It is an opportunity. The American pilot holds altitude as long as he can, knowing that dropping lower only invites more flak. He trims the aircraft carefully, nursing what lift remains. There is no escort now. No radio call will change that. The formation is already miles ahead, shrinking into dots. And then the fighter appears. Close enough that the crew can see markings. Close enough that the next decision will not be made by machines or formations, but by one man in one cockpit. Technological angle. Leadership, moral angle. Technologically, the flying fortress is built for punishment, but not for miracles. The B-17F is a compromise between range, payload, and survivability. 4 engines to keep flying after damage, a rugged airframe, and multiple gun positions designed to make a fighter pay for every approach. Even so, its real protection is not steel. It is geometry. The defensive lattice formed when dozens of bombers fly together, gun arcs overlapping until the air becomes dangerous to enter. When a B-17 is alone, all that engineering becomes finite. Ammunition runs down. Guns can freeze or jam. Hydraulic lines rupture. A few hits in the wrong places. Control cables, fuel tanks, oxygen systems, and the aircraft becomes a falling object. Ye Olde Pub is already at that edge, held up by what still works and by the discipline of its crew. The German fighter closing in is built for the opposite job. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 is smaller, faster, and designed to climb into the bomber stream, strike, and break away. In late 1943, the Luftwaffe is under pressure. Shortages, exhaustion, and a defensive battle over its own cities. But its pilots still carry the hard habits of interception. Close. Aim for engines and crew compartments. conserve ammunition, confirm the kill. Then the story shifts from technology to the man in the cockpit. The fighter pilot is Franz Stiegler, an experienced Luftwaffe pilot who, by his own later account, closes in expecting to finish a damaged bomber. What he sees at close range changes the encounter. The fortress is so badly shot up that it no longer looks like a clean target. Its crew is exposed. Some guns are silent. The plane is still flying, but only just. In accounts tied to Stiegler's recollections and later retellings, this is where he frames his decision. Shooting would feel less like combat and more like an execution. The moral angle in wartime cannot be romanticized. The Luftwaffe is fighting for a regime engaged in mass murder across Europe. The Allied bomber offensive is killing civilians in German cities. By December 1943, the air war is already far past any clean idea of chivalry. And yet, within that brutal reality, individual choices still exist. Stiegler's choice, again as far as sources allow us to say, appears to be a refusal to fire on an aircraft he sees as defenseless. Instead of attacking, he stays with it, close enough that the bomber crew can see him clearly. This is not safety. It is exposure to American guns if they suddenly resume fire, and to German defenses that could mistake his intent. The bomber continues forward, trembling in the cold air as the fighter holds position beside it, an enemy close enough to kill, choosing not to. That choice is the turning point the war does not predict. The distance closes until there is no abstraction left. The fighter slides in alongside the bomber, not attacking from behind, not firing, just there, close enough to read markings, close enough to see faces through broken plexiglass. Inside Ye Olde pub, the crew braces for the end. The remaining gunners track the aircraft, fingers stiff on triggers, waiting for the flash that usually comes without warning. It does not come. The fighter holds formation, matching speed with a plane that can barely keep itself level. From the German cockpit, the damage is unmistakable. The tail is shredded. One engine is feathered. Holes mark the fuselage like open wounds. A dead crewman is visible inside. This is not a bomber still capable of fighting its way home. It is an aircraft surviving on momentum and discipline alone. In later accounts attributed to Franz Stiegler, he recalls thinking of the rules taught by a former commander, that a pilot does not shoot a helpless enemy, that doing so would make him no better than the men he despised. Whether every detail of that memory can be independently verified or not, the result is visible in the sky. The guns stay silent. The fighter shifts position, moving deliberately, not into a firing line, but into view, so the bomber crew can see the intent. Stiegler signals, gestures, attempts to guide the aircraft away from deeper German airspace. The implication is clear, even if the meaning is uncertain. The longer the bomber stays here, the less chance it has. The American pilot does not follow. He cannot. Training, fear, and uncertainty all collide. Following a German fighter could be a trap. Staying on course at least means the crew controls its own fate. They continue west. As they approach the German coastline, the danger changes shape. Flak batteries below are still active. A damaged bomber flying straight and low is an easy target. The fighter remains alongside, now doing something more dangerous than attacking, shielding the bomber's vulnerable side from ground fire, staying close enough that German gunners may hesitate. Every second here carries risk. If German fighters see this, questions will follow. If American gunners fire, reflexively, everything ends. The North Sea lies ahead, a thin gray line under cloud. Reaching it does not mean safety, but it means choice. The fighter waggles its wings once, then slowly, deliberately, it peels away. The bomber continues alone. The Separation is quiet. No flare, no burst of fire, just distance opening where closeness had been. Inside the bomber, no one celebrates. The crew watches the fighter disappear, unsure whether this is mercy or a delayed attack. The aircraft shudders, as if reminding them that nothing fundamental has changed. They are still badly damaged, still leaking oil and heat, still flying a machine never meant to look like this and remain airborne. Below them, the gray surface of the North Sea spreads out under low cloud. Reaching it matters. Over water, German flak falls silent. Over water, the Luftwaffe's defensive grid loosens. It is not safety, but it is a narrowing of threats. The pilot holds a steady heading, fighting fatigue that has crept in unnoticed. The adrenaline of imminent death drains away, replaced by the long strain of keeping an injured aircraft alive. Engine instruments are watched constantly. A small fluctuation could mean another loss. There is no margin left to trade. In the tail section, what remains of it, the silence feels unnatural. The gunner's position is shattered. The rear defense, the part of the fortress designed to look death straight in the eye, is gone. That is where most fighters would have come from. That is where they did not. Hours pass in fragments. The bomber descends slowly, trading altitude for control as fuel burns off. Ice forms on exposed metal. The wounded crewmen fade in and out of awareness, attended to by men who should be gunners or radio operators, now acting as medics. When the English coastline finally appears, it does not arrive like relief. It arrives like disbelief. Navigation is careful. The pilot lines up for a landing that will test what remains of the airframe. When the wheels touch the runway at RAF Seething, the impact sends a jolt through the fuselage, but the aircraft stays upright. Only then does the crew begin to understand the scale of what has happened. Ground crews count over 200 holes in the aircraft. Sections that should not exist are missing. One crewman has been killed. Several are wounded. The plane is categorized as damaged beyond economical repair, but it has returned. The fighter pilot does not file a claim. There is no victory mark. What remains of his decision exists only in memory and consequence. The bomber crew survives because, at one point in the sky, the war paused just long enough for a man to choose restraint. That choice will echo long after the engines cool. The landing does not end the war for the men of Ye Olde Pub, but it redraws its boundaries. Medics reach the aircraft quickly. The wounded are removed first, some suffering from frostbite and shock, others from shrapnel and gunfire sustained over Bremen. One crewman is confirmed killed during the mission. The rest, against expectation, are alive. On the flight line, the bomber is examined in silence. Armorers and mechanics trace damage with gloved hands, counting holes in the fuselage, wings, and tail. Control surfaces are torn. Systems are compromised. The official assessment comes without drama. The aircraft is written off, too badly damaged to be repaired for combat service. Its survival is an anomaly, not a model. Operational reports record the mission in the language of statistics. Bremen is struck. Losses are tallied. Another day in the air war closes. The extraordinary details of one bomber's return do not alter strategy. The 8th Air Force will fly again and again. The pressure on German industry will continue to build through 1944. For the crew, the psychological impact is harder to quantify. First missions are meant to teach procedures and discipline. This one teaches mortality. Some men will continue flying, others will be reassigned. None will forget the image of an enemy fighter close enough to touch, choosing not to fire. On the German side, there is no official record acknowledging the encounter, no commendation, no formal reprimand that can be conclusively traced to this event. The Luftwaffe in late 1943 is fighting a defensive war under growing strain, and individual acts, especially those that do not produce a confirmed kill, leave little paper behind. What survives instead is silence. Silence in the kill logs, silence in the victory boards, and a silence shared by two airmen on opposite sides of a war that is still very far from finished. That silence will last decades. For years after the war, the incident exists only in fragments of memory. The American crew disperses into civilian life. The German pilot returns to a defeated country, carrying a decision that in 1943 could not be spoken aloud without consequence. There is no immediate closure, no official recognition on either side. The war ends. Time moves on. It is not until the late 1980s that the silence breaks. Former B-17 pilot Charles "Charlie" Brown, still troubled by the encounter he never fully understood, begins searching for the German fighter pilot who spared his crew. He writes letters. He publishes inquiries through veteran organizations. For years, nothing comes back. Then, in 1990, a reply arrives. The man who answers is Franz Stiegler. When they finally speak, their accounts align on the central fact. The bomber was defenseless, and the choice not to fire was deliberate. Stiegler later states that he could not bring himself to shoot men who were already beaten, recalling the instruction of a former commander who warned that firing on a helpless enemy would be murder, not combat. The two men meet in person soon after. Their relationship is not framed as forgiveness or absolution, but recognition. Brown describes Stiegler not as a former enemy, but as a brother. Stiegler, for his part, refers to the bomber crew as those who were in my hands. These quotations, recorded in interviews and veteran accounts from the early 1990s, become the first public acknowledgement of what happened in the sky that winter day. There are no medals issued retroactively for mercy, no official doctrine rewritten. But the story circulates quietly through military history, aviation circles, and oral testimony because it resists the expected shape of total war. Both men live into the early 2000s. When Franz Stiegler dies in 2008, Charlie Brown states that he has not lost a former enemy, but a friend. The war that once defined them has long since ended, but the choice that linked them remains intact. It is a reminder preserved not in archives alone, but in memory, because restraint leaves no wreckage behind. This encounter did not change the course of the war. Bombing campaigns continued. Cities burned. Fighters kept climbing into hostile skies. Industrial war does not turn on single moments of restraint, but history is not only shaped by outcomes, it is shaped by choices. The sky over Germany in 1943 was engineered for efficiency. Machines designed to destroy machines. Men trained to follow procedures that reduced hesitation. And yet, inside that system, the war still depended on individuals who could see clearly enough to decide when duty ended and conscience began. Technologically, the event reminds us that even the most advanced weapons are limited by the humans who operate them. The B-17 survived not because it was invulnerable, but because someone chose not to exploit its vulnerability. No armor plate can account for that. In terms of leadership, the incident exposes an uncomfortable truth. Moral instruction does not vanish in total war, but it becomes invisible. It survives quietly, passed from one pilot to another, tested in seconds that never make it into official reports. And for human history, the meaning is simpler. At a moment when killing was expected, restraint became an act of resistance, not against the enemy, but against the erosion of humanity itself. The bomber returned with half a plane. The fighter returned with no victory. Only one of those outcomes could not be measured.